Heavenly Father, today we put on the full armor to protect us against attack. We put on the belt of truth to protect against lies and deception. We put on the breastplate of righteousness to protect our hearts from the temptations. We put the gospel of peace on our feet to walk in your light, peace, and freedom with the Holy Spirit. We rebuke anxious thoughts. We take up your shield of faith for protection to block and destroy all the darts and threats thrown at us by the enemy. We put on the helmet of salvation to cover our minds and thoughts, reminding us that we are children of a mighty King. We are forgiven, set free, saved by the blood of Jesus. We take up the sword of the Spirit, your living word, that has the power to demolish strongholds and is sharper than any double-edged sword. We come to you, Lord, in prayer daily. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm honored to introduce you all to UAP, UFO, and NHI experiencer, abductee and whistleblower, mind control survivor and victim, retired police officer and investigator, surfer, gym-goer, wife to her husband of over 25 years, dog mama to her new puppy, podcaster, writer, independent researcher and reporter, and a woman on a mission to shine a light on the darkness, Fringe. Fringe was born into a multi-generational abductee and experiencer family and spent her first 6 weeks of life in foster care. Her birth mother has had experiences with Hat Man and is also likely an abductee herself, and her birth father and grandfather are also likely abductees and were heavily involved with the Lady and De Nino. Fringe's first experiences with aliens began at the age of 3.5 in the summer to fall of 1972, just outside the Naval Submarine Base in New London, Connecticut. At the time, her father was assigned to a nuclear-powered special ops submarine, and still to this day, Fringe has very little information about her father's time in the service. She has been a lucid dreamer and has been having out-of-body experiences since she was a child, likely had a near-death experience as a child, had a tiny green entity living in her hand as a child, and always felt like she was being watched since she was a child. During her childhood, she suffered abuse at the hands of her stepfather, who was physically and psychologically abusive. And between all of these events occurring simultaneously at such a young age, she developed some deep-rooted fears that have remained with her all her life. At the age of 17, Fringe had her own conscious experience with Hat Man and has had countless negative experiences with shadow beings since then. After the age of 30, she came to realize her family was involved with some dark entities. And now, in her 50s, she has come to a place in her life where she has been able to truly find the time and space to sit with and ask the hard questions of what happened to me, why did it happen to me, and do all of these seemingly random, terrifying, and bizarre events and experiences connect somehow? And the answers she has come up with have been groundbreaking for both the UFO, UAP, and NHI community, as well as for the ritual abuse and mind control survivor community. Her years of investigative experiences, coupled with her countless number of conscious experiences, has led her to arrive at some loosely held conclusions regarding these phenomena. Since arriving at her own provisional conclusions, Fringe has had the opportunity to read abduction research and to consult with other researchers and abductees, which has served to validate and confirm her own ideas. She will be covering some of her beliefs and ideas today in addition to her testimony, including how aliens may not be from outer space, and also that their agendas may in fact be negative, despite the mainstream narratives. Fringe's research is open-minded, controversial, and compelling, and it is a reason I knew her story needed to be told and heard by all of you on the other side of the screen. One thing Fringe's conclusions help us to do is get closer to bridging the gap between MKUltra, government-sponsored programs, and abduction and UFO experiences. If you've been a loyal follower of this show, you know it is extremely common for MKUltra, SRA, and mind control survivors to have had alien and abduction experiences while involved in government-sponsored child slavery programs. Unfortunately, the experiencer and survivor movements and communities seem to mostly function separate from one another, and without the dialogue on how they connect, we're missing a great opportunity to understand both phenomena better at the areas in which they intersect. I personally believe this divide has been intentional, and it's only going to be with the help of open-minded and grounded abduction experiencers and mind control survivors like Fringe, who aren't afraid to be unconventional thinkers who ask questions that lead us to a place where we can finally arrive at that intersection that will allow us to begin to unlock the answers to these questions that have plagued humanity for generations. I ask you all to please put away whatever you're doing, grab a pen and paper, and get ready to learn a ton in a short period of time. It's an honor we get to listen to the testimony of someone like Fringe, who has gone through and survived utter darkness, looked it straight in the eye, and who is now shining the light of truth on every shadow so that no darkness remains and no voice goes unheard. Before I finish introducing today's guest, I wanted to give just a couple quick reminders and updates. If you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, share any information privately with me, or submit a written testimony to be published in my upcoming book series or as an article on my Substack, you can email me at imagineabetterworld2020@gmail.com. I'm also proud to announce a new partnership I have with one of my favorite brands, Rife Technologies, which is a new and innovative company dedicated to revolutionizing the health tech industry. The Real Rife machine is an electromagnetic radio frequency device engineered by scientist Dr. Royal Raymond Rife in the 1920s and was used to address various health concerns. These technologies have been used and referenced by many guests on this podcast, and I'm excited to announce that you can now gift yourself with 15% off your Rife Technologies order with the link I have posted in the show notes, along with the code 420 at checkout. All the rest of my links are in the show notes as well, and I'd love your support across all platforms. Thank you all for caring so deeply about survivors and whistleblowers, and for helping to make the imagination the safest space on the internet for survivor and whistleblower disclosures. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming today's guest of honor, voice for the voiceless, woman of God, survivor, overcomer, experiencer, warrior, walking miracle, survivor advocate, and someone I'm honored to call my new friend, the one, the only, Fringe. Fringe, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Emma, that is the most amazing introduction I've ever had. I'm certainly not worthy of it, but wow. Thank you so much for your kind words. I truly appreciate it. And I very much appreciate being here. I think it's going to be so important for the future of both of our communities to kind of come together and start pulling these puzzle pieces from both sides. And I think the targeted individual community as well. We have so much overlap, but we don't talk a lot. We kind of stay in our little groups, and our groups are fantastic and they're supportive and wonderful, but I think this crossover is going to be amazing. And I want to thank Erin actually for being the first to come on to your show. It was amazing. Thank you so much for having me today.
Absolutely. And you're so right. That's why I really wanted you to come on, because your testimony starts to link a lot of those things together. I know there's still some unknowns and some questions and some things that we still have to figure out. But with everybody that has an open mind like you know, that's willing to go outside the box of sort of what's been traditionally said in these sort of segregated communities, and to invite some other ideas from some other areas of child abuse or TIs, like you were saying, targeted individuals, there really is a lot of crossover. And I think if we all sort of put all of our information in one spot, we can start to get closer to that, you know, and disperse our puzzle pieces to other people who might need them or who are missing, you know, stuff in their own story. So I really loved how you have such an open mind. You know, you've done a lot of research over the years, and especially these last couple years, you know, and you've kept a very open mind about what all of this stuff could mean. So I'm really excited and honored to have you here too. I know that this is going to be an impactful testimony that's going to touch a lot of people on the other side of the screen. So let's go back in time, Fringe, and let's lay the background of before you were here. Let's talk a little bit about the generational side of this type of abuse. That's something that hasn't ever come up on my podcast, how something like experiencers and abductees could have some type of a generational or bloodline tie. So let's talk about what that looked like in your family and anything that you want to contribute to your research on that aspect of it.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting overlap that we both have. So both communities have this interesting bloodline and generational, it's almost like a curse, right? The abductee research shows that abductees have at least one parent who was also an abductee. And then the research has actually gone back to the late 1800s. going back at the time that this was started, these individuals were either still alive or there was something in their memoirs or et cetera that also allowed the researchers to know that this has been going on at least that long, at least this modern era that we're seeing. The modern abductee phenomenon has been going on at least that long. So it's very much generational. These so-called aliens seem to be very concerned with certain bloodlines and genetics. And if as an abductee, I can know with almost certainty that my children are also abductees, etc. And so it's the abductee's child. It's also the abductee's parent. In my case, it's actually both sides. My mother and my father both have contact with these entities. Don't know at this point my mother's side as far as my grandmother goes, although she certainly had her signs as well. But she's passed. And then I do know on my father's side that my grandfather was also an experiencer, just because of the tales that were told on that side of the family. So it's an interesting overlap. We also have a lot of abductees exposed to MK Ultra programming and involved in MILABS, if your audience is familiar with that term, military abductions. So there's going to be a lot of overlap here, and I'm just super excited to talk about it today. And by the way, I mentioned this before we started, I'm actually still on my own journey trying to figure out some of my own stuff. And I would love for any of your listeners, any prior guests, anybody that might have any information to help me out too. And as my story goes along, I'll kind of be pointing those areas out, specifically with the MK Ultra and the MILAB stuff that I've experienced.
That's awesome. Yes. And anybody listening, if you guys want to leave stuff in the comments, I'm also going to have Fringe's Twitter link down below. If you guys aren't following her and you're on Twitter, you should. And we'll go over that later. She'll be able to tell you guys where you can find her. But I would encourage you guys to go reach out and contribute puzzle pieces or pick her brain if there's something that you guys want to know. Because this is part of sharing is to educate the public, but also to help others who have gone through other things that are similar or who have sort of different stories, but it ties in somehow. Maybe there's a little piece of the puzzle that ties in that we can contribute. So I would love if anybody could, help out and contribute to any of the sort of missing links that we're going to share today on Fringe's testimony. And thank you so much for explaining the bloodline thing. I think that's really fascinating. You were the first one that brought that to my attention about this. I don't hear that talked about very much in the UFO UAP community. It almost, and especially whenever you see it, on the news and in documentaries, they make it seem so random that it's just these random hillbillies out in the desert in their, mobile home that get abducted. And I'm like, there's got to be more to this, So it's really neat getting to see these tie-ins and that there's patterns to it that aren't talked about often. And so let's talk about your birth. So you had a really interesting story right after your birth that had to have been traumatic for a little baby, but let's talk about that and sort of lead that into your first experience that you had at 3.5 years old.
Sure. So hopefully this doesn't get a little too crazy. So my mother was young when she was pregnant. My grandmother was super religious. And when she found out my mom was pregnant, my mom was sent to a home for unwed mothers. So she spent a lot of her pregnancy there at the home for unwed mothers. And after she gave birth, they just took me from her. So she didn't even hold me. And I was sent to foster care. This is part of the research that, I'm still going on. I've looked up this home for unwed mothers and tried to figure out, how did I get on this radar? But it turns out, my mother was already on the radar. But I don't know this until recently. I did go to a foster care for 6 weeks. We know that there's some strange connection between foster care and the strange things that happen to children, although I can't say that that's what happened to me. I did go to a second foster family. The second foster family actually this foster family actually tried to adopt me. But in the meanwhile, my foster mother actually broke some rules and she started letting my mother, my real biological mother, visit me at her home. And it was to the point where she was actually letting my biological mother take me home, which she wasn't supposed to do. But, and this might sound super weird, but it turns out the short story is that my foster mother's son actually ended up marrying my mother. So it might sound a little complicated, but it's really not. My mom started hanging around at the house, visiting me. My foster mother, who wanted to adopt me, was not permitted to adopt me, but she got the next best thing, which was getting her son to marry my mother. So she gets her son to marry my mother. He is now my father. Now, at this time, and for all of my growing up, I had no idea I was adopted on one half of my family. So I grew up believing this man was my father. And to be fair to this man, I was one of his own. I had no idea. And he's a great and wonderful man. So I grew up with this man as my father, and he actually enlisted in the military. He was in the Navy, and I ended up with a little sister and some other siblings, but at first it was just us. And he enlisted in the military. He went to some training schools, and then my sister was born. And it leads up to my first alien experience, which was in New London, Connecticut, right outside of a submarine base. There's a submarine base there in New London, Connecticut. My father, and if I say my father, I mean my foster brother, who turned out to be my father. He was on the USS Dace out of New London, Connecticut, and he ended up on the USS Seawolf. And both of those submarines were involved in some interesting operations. There's actually been a book written about it. My father is so loyal and such a patriot that to this minute, he will not discuss what was going on those submarines. I have asked him, because hopefully I'm not rambling too much, but a lot of abductees, turns out, and especially MILAB abductees, we have some type of connection with the military, with an intelligence agency, with a JPL or, something like that. And so since I've been an adult, I've been looking for these questions, answers to these questions. It's actually only been the last couple of years I've really been asking. He won't say anything. And he has told me that intelligence was on these ships. I have an idea of what these ships were doing. Like I said, there was actually a book written about it, but he won't speak about it. He takes this oath so very seriously. And a lot of people don't understand that. They say, well, why don't people just come forward and talk about these things? But anyway, I have searched that connection, and I'm at a dead end there, although there is interesting connections between nuclear submarines and UFOs. I don't have anything for my adopted father's side of the family to link back to explain what's happening to me that I'm aware of. I've asked him all the questions. I get nowhere. So New London, Connecticut, I'm 3.5 years old, and I have reconstructed this. I knew that when I was a kid, I was living in a certain apartment, and my bed was in this spot, and the door was here, and these different things that happened to me during this experience. I've actually gone back and reconstructed this with my mom. And I say, hey, Mom, this is the apartment. This is where everything was at. What apartment was this? And she told me, I drew it out for her. She said, oh, yeah, that's where we were. We were living in New London. My dad was actually deployed on this nuclear submarine. And at the time, I woke up in the middle of the night, and I was just frozen. And there were at the time, I had no idea, I had no reference for this. Just two very tall, skinny creatures in my doorway. They were standing side by side. They both fit in the doorway. These are not robust creatures. They were very skinny. And this experience, I've thought about this a lot. I don't remember even being afraid. I was just frozen and not really understanding what I was seeing. After that time, though, I became extremely afraid. And this is where some of these fears started as a kid. And it can be, pretty normal and natural for kids to be afraid of certain things. But this is where mine started. I started with having to kind of run and jump so that nothing would grab me from under the bed. I was afraid of my closet. I would lay almost frozen on my back, just kind of waiting for something to show up. And even though I don't have any memories before seeing the creatures in the room or after seeing the creatures in the room, I have no idea whether I was abducted that night. Now, the research shows this probably ended in an abduction that night. I just don't remember. But that was my very first experience. I didn't have any reference for it. I didn't know what these things were. So, interesting that it happened right outside of a naval submarine base, but I still can't connect it to there. So if anybody has any ideas on that, I actually reached out to a researcher yesterday or the day before. He's got this huge database of sightings because there was a light coming in my window. So I don't know if there could have been a UFO outside my window, but I reached out to him and he's searching the database for me to see if he can come up with any sightings in 1972 in Newland and Connecticut outside the base. So that was my first experience. It's kind of anticlimactic. I don't even really know what happened after that. I don't know what happened before or after it. It was kind of in my kid's head, an isolated incident at the time.
Oh my gosh, that would be so terrifying at that young. I understand what you mean though, that like, in your child's mind, you were frozen, like, just what is this, But man, I just think about how terrifying that would be. And of course, that would cause some type of residual trauma where it would, I'm sure a lot of things were startling after that. And then you have some other things that will come on a little bit later in your story, but I thought maybe we'd introduce them through your parents had a couple experiences, and I'd love to just touch on that because I know you and your mother, the Hat Man is something that you both share. Would you be able to paint some insight on maybe a couple things that they experienced? And was that happening while you were a child, or was that before you were born? What did that time look like for them?
So I've spoken to my mother very recently, just kind of straighten everything out. I think one thing that's really important is for us to talk, for families to talk. It's probably true in your community as well, but people don't want to talk about this stuff. People get super weird and they just, well, what are you talking about? And they just kind of back away from the topic. They want to answer questions. It's a little strange, but it's not strange. It's actually understandable. But my mother was pretty open about things. And when I started talking to my mom, she started going, wait a minute. I didn't never told you, XYZ happened to me when I was a kid, etc. So when my mom was a kid, and I always said prefer her to tell her own story, but I can just give you a general history. When she was, I think she said she was 10 years old. She was living, I'd rather not say actually. She was 10 years old and she remembers seeing what people now call the Hat Man. So when I was young, this creature did not have a name, but this creature has been seen all across the world in all types of different cultures, etc. And he now has a name, and it's Hat Man. And this is a shadow creature. Generally speaking, he's fairly tall. A lot of times he is seen with a hat, different types of hats, and a lot of times he's seen with a cape. So my mom sees this creature outside of her bedroom window, and she said she remembered wondering how could it, because I believe this was a second story or an attic window she was looking at, and I will be corrected on that if she corrects me, but it was a second story window. She's like, how is this thing looking at me in my window? And it happened multiple times, and she could never understand why this thing was able to be levitating essentially or appearing outside of a second story window. So this happened to her multiple times as a child. And then as an adult in this last year, my mom has been through severe attacks by these shadow beings. And a lot of times she actually will call them demons, because she is feeling an extreme evil. She has seen claws. And without getting too personal, she's had some severe traumatic experiences over this last year with these creatures. And then in December of 2023, she actually saw a manted creature in her bedroom. And this was a creature she had never seen before, had remembered seeing before. And she was scrolling through social media, probably mine. And she went, oh my gosh, this thing that I just saw posted on Twitter, and this thing was in my bedroom. And so she had no reference for it whatsoever. She's not, you know, in the UFO community or up to speed on what aliens look like, you know, the so-called aliens or anything like this. And she proceeds to tell me about this entire experience that she had with this mantid. And so that was December of 2023. Her experience just continued, I believe, throughout January. And then she actually went to Deliverance this last year in January on an emergency basis because it was so bad. These demonic creatures were attacking her so severely that she actually traveled out of state to go to Deliverance. She's been doing really well since then. She's had a really good year since then, so she's pretty super excited about it. And I actually ended up going to Deliverance too. That's a whole other story. So that's my mother's side. On my father's side, my biological father's side, so my adoptive father, I'm nowhere with that. Just that, you know, he was on a nuclear submarine. My biological father, I met when I was in my 30s. I had no contact with him at all. Again, I was given up into foster care at birth. He never saw me, never visited me that I'm aware of, and that my mom remembers. So when I was in my 30s, through whatever circumstances ended up happening, I ended up finding my biological father. We meet up with actually my mother, my husband, and I met up with my biological father. We went out to lunch for the first meeting. And after that meeting, I ended up over time finding out a lot of things about him that actually in the very beginning, I thought, this guy's just nutty. Like, he can't possibly be telling me the truth with the stuff that he was telling me. And I'll kind of get into that. So the very first thing, so I was a police officer for my entire career, was spent in law enforcement. And so when he found out I was a police officer, the first thing he said to me was, well, this is probably a good time to tell you I did a nickel in Quentin. And San Quentin is a prison in California. And he said it, and I thought, okay, this is interesting. So if you've been around inmates, the only people who say a nickel 5 years in Quentin are people who have been in the system. Like, it's not just something that you make up, right? So he says it, and I think, okay, all right, you know, what were you there for? And this is a first meeting. I've never met this man. And over time, he ends up telling me what he was in for, and he starts telling me stories. And I end up meeting him several times. He ended up coming to my house. I met some family members, and this is going on over several months. So I end up with him telling me some stories. And again, in the beginning, I thought he was just crazy. And it turned out, actually, the short story is I end up verifying what he was saying was true. So he does a nickel in Quentin. And the story he tells me is that he was running an international human trafficking ring. And it's actually turns out to be the entire family on that side. It was my father and my grandfather. It was my grandmother and my aunt and his brother. This was a so-called family business. In fact, an aunt from a long time ago somehow found me on Facebook, and she said, "Are you aware of the family business?" I mean, that's just what they called it, the family business. So this is what he's telling me, that he was actually trafficking children and adults, and he would get girls from Thailand. He would bring them in, I think it was Miami, but he would bring them into Florida, and then he would bring them throughout the United States. He had, at the time, he called it a brothel, which was an interesting word, but this was when he was doing this, or when he actually got caught doing this, because he actually went to prison for it. It was, I believe, 1988 is when he was caught and he went to prison. He was taking girls, and some of these girls are as long, I believe the youngest girl I'm aware of was 13 years old, but I have no idea how much younger it even got from there. He was taking girls from Florida. He had a place in Vegas, Idaho, Washington, and San Francisco. This was a very large operation. This was not just him pimping out girls on the street. This was an operation. He was actually a contractor for the mob. And it was a whole thing. So it was a whole entire family business. And at this time in 1988 in San Francisco, and why he ends up going to prison is because in 1988, he had a so-called brothel in San Francisco with, they're calling them underage prostitutes, which, as you and I know, there's no such thing as an underage prostitute. That is child trafficking, period. And those are victims. So he has a full-blown child trafficking operation to the point where these girls who are later interviewed for the grand jury are telling the story of how my father wanted them to act as young as possible. They dressed in cheerleader outfits, and they pretended to be virgins, and they had a whole entire scam going for acting like as little girl as possible. Absolutely disgusting. The rest of this is that the entire, or I should say the entire, the majority of the police department was involved. The chief of police was involved. The city manager was involved. And the mayor was involved. And so it was a big deal. It was a huge deal. And he ends up telling me that because he was a contractor for the mob, and they actually made a deal for him to take the fall for this operation. And one of his regular clients, and as he put it to me, was every Tuesday, was Dianne Feinstein and her husband. And at the time, I believe Dianne Feinstein was either a mayor or some type of city official in San Francisco. She was not yet a senator that I'm aware of, although she later became a senator. She actually just recently died. She and her husband would so-called share, these are my father's words, my biological father's words, a 13-year-old girl every Tuesday. Now, what was happening in this room, some of the things that he told me about, was very ritualistic. They were lighting candles and they were doing rituals, and I'm not going to get into any details. And to be honest with you, Emma, at the time, I thought this guy's nuts. He's making this up. There's no possible way that I found my biological birth father, and he is literally running an international human trafficking ring. As a matter of fact, I believe at some point they were on America's Most Wanted. I mean, the whole gamut. So he's telling me all these stories. And at the time, they're just stories. And I'm thinking, man, this guy's crazy. So the stories go on to rituals in the desert, him meeting Satan himself, all kinds of very dark satanic rituals and ties are going on with this human trafficking ring. And apparently, ultimately, he does get caught, and he actually goes to prison, and he actually makes a deal. I don't know if he was paid money or what happened, but he actually takes the fall for Feinstein, her husband, and there was multiple police officers involved. As a matter of fact, I sent you a link to newspaper articles. This was printed in newspaper in San Francisco, also in Los Angeles, and his name and everything is in there. I might even just post it someday because I'm over it.
I can bring it up if you want. Totally up to you, but I can bring up the articles if you want.
Yeah, go right ahead.
You can keep talking.
So, and I sent you those articles just to prove this is not just a story. Like, this actually happened. This is not just something, that I'm talking about. So he goes to prison. These young women, these children, some of them testify at a grand jury. I believe the city manager is convicted, but I will stand corrected on any of that. I can promise you he was convicted. There was a city manager involved. There were multiple police officers involved. At some point, a police officer was murdered during this incident, or during this whole investigation. A police officer was actually murdered. The entirety of the police department was dirty. They were all involved in this sex ring, and they were all involved in covering up the sex ring. So this was a big deal back then. As a matter of fact, this murder is still unsolved to this day. I think there's still a reward out. I'm thinking about claiming it. No, I'm just not actually being serious about that because there's no evidence actually to convict him that I'm aware of. Yeah, so there it is. That's just one article. I actually have an entire book. So I'll try to make the story a little shorter. So this is happening. At some point, this man is actually visiting me at my house because at this time I'm thinking, this guy's got to be just a little nutty. I can't actually believe that any of this is actually true. And the very last time I saw him, he came to my home, and he later ended up telling me that and I never actually figured out who they were, that they told him that I was a reptilian and that he had showed up that day at my home to kill me and he was going to execute me. And his talk was very much full of reptilians and rituals and Satan and whatever they were doing out in the desert and his human trafficking ring. So on this day, and I can't swear by this timing because it has been many, many years. That was the last time I saw him, obviously. The man's threatening to kill me because he thinks I'm a reptilian. And at the time, look, we talk about reptilians now that I have found this UFO community, but there were no reptilians in my life when I was in my 30s. I had not heard of any conspiracies. I was not a conspiracy person. I didn't even know what this man was talking about. And I'm thinking this man is nuts. So what actually ends up happening is I end up actually verifying that he did, in fact, have a prisoner number, that he was in San Quentin for 5 years. And I ended up reaching out to a journalist in San Francisco. And the journalist actually pulled up a bunch of stuff out of the archives for me. And it turned out that every single word he told me was actually true, and it was backed up by documents. I have those documents actually sitting here right here on my desk. A lot of them are newspaper stories and newspaper reportings on what happened with this brothel and this murder of this officer. So that's my biological father. During this time, we actually have some very strange shared dreams, and things start kind of going down the woo rabbit hole. And I gave him a journal, and it was a journal that asked prompted questions so that I could kind of learn about the history and the family history and what his childhood was like, et cetera. And this is kind of still back when I'm a little bit naive and just thinking, oh, I just met my biological father, right? So, and I actually still have this journal today, and I have the excerpts from this journal that he was, it sounds to me like he was a Christian. And then this entity who was involved with this entities, he called it De Nino. It's De Nino de Atocha. It's just a Hispanic version of a baby Jesus. So you have the lady who appears as Fatima, and then you have her child, which is De Nino, and this baby Jesus. And so this entity had appeared to him. It had told him that Christ was not the real Christ, but that this entity was the real Christ. This is him telling me he had been levitated in his backyard. This is also in writing in a story that he told me, that one day his father, my grandfather, biological grandfather, introduced him to this entity and it levitated him in his backyard. This entity has supposedly saved his life on multiple occasions. Even in this diary, he has written, what's the most interesting thing you've ever seen? Satan. And so there is a demonic, diabolical side to this side of my family. And it becomes interesting for me later in life when I figure out and I start putting all my puzzle pieces together. The first thing the researchers ask me is, who's in the occult? who's worshiping Satan. And I was like, oh, that would be my biological father. So again, I ended up verifying all of the stuff he told me. Now, can I verify that he was having rituals in the desert? No. But when I do, I am able to verify with an independent journalist that the other things he told me that were true. Now I'm tending to believe these things that I cannot be proven and there's no evidence for. And then especially looking at my own life and the things that have happened to me, I do believe that all of this happened while he did go to prison. It's actually a fact. And it is a fact that he was running this international human trafficking ring and that, you know, all of that stuff was taking place. So I think this question started out on my parents on both sides being experiencers or something, or did you actually lead us down this road? I can't remember.
I did. I was hoping that
Here
you would
we are,
a little bit
wherever
about.
we ended up.
Yes.
Do you have any questions about that? That's great. I probably didn't even fill in the half of it of actually what was going on.
Oh my gosh. Well, I know whenever I was reading those articles that you sent, it obviously doesn't mention anything satanic. It's terrible what it does mention, but it
Yes.
obviously leaves out that part, which does bring a lot to the table of, how was that part of your life and the genetic side, the bloodline side? We know that occultism, and satanic rituals and, these types of abuse are also passed down generationally. And like we were saying in the beginning, a lot of satanic ritual abuse survivors, in the family somehow, whether, everybody in the families experience it or certain people, there are abductees and alien experiences and UAPs and UFOs, and lots of non-human intelligence. So, that sort of clicked in my mind because I know that there's pieces to your puzzle that are missing, and I'm very curious about how that lineage, may have impacted what happened to you or made you a target for, the government. Because a lot of times the government has their hands in, occultism, and it sounds like you said all the way up to the mayor was involved. That's a big story. I mean, it's terrifying, and but at the same time, we know that that happens in every city, but to me, it's crazy that there was actually a conviction for it on that level.
Right. And I think I think it was the murder of the officer that actually tipped everything over the edge. That was something they couldn't really explain or cover up as easily. And the way my biological father explained this to me is that they made a deal. Like he took the fall for Dianne Feinstein, for her husband, and for the mob. It was his operation, but he was working for someone else. He was working with the permission of, the gatekeepers and the keepers of the cash. So it's not just him, running the show. He was actually probably a front man for the real show. And so it was agreed that he would actually do the prison time and that everybody else would not even face charges. I believe that the city manager faced charges and another police officer. And I think the other 8 or 9 cops they were investigating, it might have even been 12 cops who were investigating, I don't think there was ever any charges against them. So a deal was made. But you're right. It was extraordinary to me that I was able to say, wait a minute, maybe this guy's not a nut. I need to check this out and find out who this guy is. And it turned out he was exactly who he said he was. And it was even worse than he explained to me and verified, that it actually happened. Yeah, it's hard to get convictions in those cases. In this case, I believe 4 or 5 of the 13 to 15 to 17 years old, I believe, between 13 and 17 years old, they actually testified. So, yeah, and I do think it was the murder of the officer that sent them over the edge. His partner, I think they refer to her as his wife in the article. I don't think she was his wife, but his partner, Kelly Sunshine Lloyd. What kind of name is that? She was on America's Most Wanted. He actually told me he was on America's Most Wanted. That was one thing I could never verify. That he was actually involved in a shootout with the police in Oklahoma or somewhere. That was one thing I could never find. But yeah, super interesting that there was a conviction and that he actually served time. So
Absolutely.
For
Even
what he was doing, by the way, accused of rape and child and human trafficking. That's not a whole lot of time, is it? But he did get convicted, so that's something.
And you mentioned America's Most Wanted. I've had his daughter, Megan Walsh, on my show. I don't know if you follow her on Twitter, but her father, John Walsh, trafficked all four of her kids through family court and CPS and foster care, which is really interesting too, because he's also heading a show, trying to expose traffickers, and people who do these really high level crimes. And, his own daughter is convicting him and, accusing him of doing this to her own children. So there's some really interesting things that, go on in our communities and right in front of our eyes that we're very oblivious to, and your story, your father's story is one of those, that it was happening in an entire San Francisco is a big city, and for that to be the mayor, Dianne Feinstein, like these are pretty big names,
Big
so
names, big
very,
names.
very interesting part of your story.
And he protected her political career. She could not have made senator if this had come out that her and her husband were sharing a 13-year-old girl at this, he called it a brothel. Fascinating. So yeah, they get protected too. So on one hand, there was a grand jury, there was a conviction. I don't know what political pressure led them to actually do that, aside from this murder of the officer. But on the other hand, the higher ups, the bigger names actually get off scot-free. So it happens.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. I know that that's not something that you cover a lot in interviews, and I think it'll be received really well here. And hopefully some other people will be able to either contribute a puzzle piece or maybe you're going to help fill in somebody else's puzzle piece. So I really appreciate you sharing and letting me show those articles.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, and I just remembered this today. I was actually writing some notes today for this because I knew I was going to talk about a couple things that I hadn't thought about in a long time. At some point, James O'Keefe was going to investigate her and try to get her on tape and stuff. And we worked on it just a little bit, and then he got to the point where he couldn't figure out how to catch her, like how to just figure out, he likes to do these stings and stuff. And at the time, he didn't have a lot of resources. This was 20 or more years ago. Let me actually be careful with that number to make sure. When was this? I'm trying to think. It was about 30 something. So it was a long time ago. So yeah, it was about 20 years ago. And he was kind of just starting out. He didn't have a lot of resources, but he was trying to figure out how to get her dirty, so to speak, because she was dirty. So he was trying to get proof, and it never really went anywhere. But yeah, super interesting.
Very interesting. And how all these different, public figures where they're at now. We see Diane still in politics too and still being talked about to this day. James is still
She,
doing.
yeah, she just passed
Yes.
last year, but she's absolutely, like you said, still a figure. I mean, she's almost a Nancy Pelosi with the power that she had, and she had California on lockdown for her entire career. I mean, she was in a wheelchair and she was still a senator. I mean, absolutely ridiculous. So yeah,
And never convicted for anything, heralded and, celebrated her whole life. And behind the scenes, other people are taking the fall for her crimes.
and again, I mean, this came from him. Now, could he have been lying? Maybe, but it turned out everything else he said was verified. So, or I should say, most of what he said was verified because I couldn't verify these rituals that they were doing.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Let's go back to your childhood. So you had this experience at 3.5, and this was one of so many experiences that are, just almost unable to be accounted for. You've had so many throughout your life. So let's continue on and talk about after that one experience, what did that look like for you as far as having more experiences? Was there some type of pattern, or what can you remember observing as a child? How often was this happening, and sort of how did that start unrolling in your life and unraveling as being sort of common for you?
So that was the only childhood experience I remember as far as having what I would now call aliens, refer to as physically looking like aliens in my room. And then my next experience was an interesting possible near-death experience. It's just something that happened to me as a kid that I always kind of just knew was super weird and probably shouldn't have gone that way. But again, I was a kid and I didn't, pursue it anymore. I just thought, man, what just happened to me? And I didn't even understand how I'd lived through it. And that was an incident where a childhood friend and I were kind of boot skating on a frozen pond in Connecticut. And I fell through the pond and I ended up under the ice. At the time, I was wearing this really heavy fake fur coat at full length, and I was wearing boots and my regular clothes underneath. It was one of those situations where I didn't have the strength to get those clothes and myself out from the pond. At one point, I actually came up under the ice and I ended up seeing white. Now, the strange part comes where my next memory is now I don't have any memories of being on the other side or, any life review or anything like that. You'll hear most near-death experiencers actually remember things like that. And that's why I kind of say it's a possible near-death experience, because my next memory is I'm getting pulled out of the pond by my little friend who's like 7 years old. There's no possible way she would have had the strength to pull me out of a pond. She hands me a stick from a bush that was still kind of anchored on the side. And I end up pulling myself out with her assistance. She's handing me the stick and I'm pulling. And I end up getting out and I walked home. And I was just thinking, what just happened? Number one. And then number two, oh my gosh, I'm in so much trouble. I just ruined my coat, So that was big on my mind as a kid. Like, what's my mom going to do? I'm going to be in big trouble because I ruined the coat. But I always knew growing up, when I would think about that incident, I always knew it was just super weird. Like, it just, the way it happened was interesting. And then, of course, as an adult, when I started looking back, I one day sat down and said, okay, where was I at this year? Where was I at that year? What was happening? And I kind of just reconstructed everything that I could remember. I reached out to family members, where were we during this year and that year? What was happening? And, just kind of trying to straighten out my life, I realized, man, that could have been a near-death experience. That was super weird. And I saw the white and everything like that. And then after that incident is when this entity starts living in my hand. And I am fully aware of how crazy that sounds. But again, as an adult, looking at the abduction research, it's actually fairly common for these entities. So I had this little tiny green entity as an adult. I have now seen it looked kind of like baby Groot. I actually came across baby Groot one day and actually jumped and went, oh my gosh, this thing looks a lot like this thing that used to live in my hand. And I found out it was baby Groot. Again, I know it sounds crazy. A lot of things I'm saying today are going to sound crazy, but the abduction research shows that these entities will present themselves to children as something fun and something, almost conspiratorial, like we're friends. A lot of times, bunny rabbits, cartoon characters, anything that can entice a child into following the entity or doing what the entity wants it to do. They'll use these characters. And so this was something I always presented as, this was not an imaginary friend. It happened in broad daylight. I was not asleep. And it would most frequently happen when I was walking home from school. And it was frequent, several days a week for a couple of years. So this was not something that at least I will ever put down to imagination or imaginary friend status. And by the way, if your child has an imaginary friend, pay attention, listen. It might not be imaginary. A lot of these things, children are told that you're just dreaming. There's no monsters under the bed. And I'm here to tell you there are monsters. There might be monsters under the bed, at least listen. So yeah, there was that entity and that was super weird. So during this time, I also had several experiences where I'm actually going out of my body as a child. There were several times where I felt like I had dropped from maybe 3 or 4 feet, dropped onto my bed. I woke up in different places. My mom would say, well, you must be sleepwalking. And maybe I was sleepwalking. I'm not sure. But again, looking at the abduction research, a lot of abductees are thought to be sleepwalking. Some of us will wake up outside, locked out of the house. For me, I would wake up in the hallway. I would wake up next to my bed instead of in my bed. I think there was a time when I actually was upside down in my bed, facing the wrong direction. So can these things happen to children? Absolutely, they can. And the abductees experience is very much about putting puzzle pieces together. And if you have, 20 out of the 25 typical signs, then you might be looking at a certain picture. Whereas it's perfectly common for a child maybe to wake up in a hallway or something, or to sleepwalk, or certain things to happen. So it's really about putting puzzle pieces together. And again, as an adult, I went back and went, wait a minute. So there's some things that was happening to me that aren't quite as normal as maybe they would have seemed at the time. So those were my childhood experiences, and that was it. When I was in fourth grade, this is something I don't talk about a lot, and I've never actually told the story. I probably won't actually tell the full story today. When I was in fourth grade, I started believing that someone was watching me when I was showering. And it was to the point in fourth grade, and I was young for my age. So I was about a half a year or so young for fourth grade. So I wasn't very old at all. I was actually looking for a camera in the bathroom because I just felt like something was watching me. And especially when I was in the bathroom, and especially in the shower. This turns into an incident that actually happened in a different house when I was in fourth grade. That as an adult, I looked back on this incident and I thought, that wasn't right. And man, I'm not sure how to explain it without really getting into the weeds. Something happened that made me, as an adult, suspect that there could have been a sexual abuse. But I want to be very clear that I have zero memories of sexual abuse as a child. And I remember a lot of my childhood. By this time, my mother is remarried. My foster father, adopted father, was out of the picture. My mother is remarried, and she's remarried to my stepfather, who was very abusive, no doubt. He was physically abusive. He was a tyrant. He was a bully. He had held a gun to my mother's belly when my sister was inside her belly. He actually shot himself in the foot that day, so he paid a little price for that. But this is the type of individual I'm speaking about. We're not talking about just low level. We're talking high level, gun to the belly. Extremely, he was violent, he was abusive, but never, as a child or as an adult, do I have any memories whatsoever of this man being inappropriate in that manner, to be very clear. But I did have a very interesting experience that I'm not going to recount right now. So that was fourth grade. And then I really, oh gosh, so I start remembering as I'm talking. So when I was about 15 years old, I end up meeting up with a girlfriend, and we actually end up playing with a Ouija board at 15 years old. Cannot recommend. Don't do it. They're for sale at the Kmart. I don't know if Kmart's in business anymore, but they're for sale at Walmart. Don't do it. Don't buy your kids a Ouija board. I cannot recommend. Just stay away from it. We do a Ouija board, and we end up in contact with something. And so during this time, both of us are actually able to move objects, bend spoons. We would wish for something and it would appear, such as money. Not a whole lot of money, just, what, it would be great to go out and, get, I'm making this up, an ice cream. Boom, $10 on the sidewalk. And it was very much like a manifesting machine, but it was dark. And we get pretty scared. And at some point, we actually try to get rid of this Ouija board. And my friend actually takes this Ouija board down to her uncle's house, far, far away, several cities away. And she leaves it there. She's like, that's it. We're out. We're not doing this anymore. We don't want anything to do with this entity, whatever it is, coming through. And it's literally like a genie granting wishes. And next thing I knew, she tells me, I think maybe a week or 2 weeks later, this Ouija board is back in her house. And at that age, now we're super freaked out. We're going, oh my gosh, what is happening? This is way too freaky. And it was scary, it was scary to have a Ouija board supposedly show up back at the house. Could she have been tricking me or something? Sure, I won't know that for sure, but I don't have any reason not to trust her. I also had a shared dream with her. And one day we both woke up from a dream. We were slept in separate places, although we hung out a lot. And we both, this is when I started having the extreme cataclysmic dreams. So as a child and really throughout my whole life, I was dreaming of airplane crashes and a lot of cataclysmic things happening. Airplane crashes was a big highlight of my childhood. But then at 15, I actually dream of catastrophic earth changes, like the world is going to end. Jesus is coming back. The world is going to end. And there's going to be a pole shift, essentially, where the entire world is going to turn upside down and, very, very bad news. Well, she had that same dream the same night, and we came together the next day and we talked about it. And so we both had this dream that the world was ending. Well, so I've been waiting for the pole shift since I was 15 years old, is basically. And then those dreams never stopped. So essentially, since I was a child, I've been dreaming of these airplane crashes and some earth changes. But then at 15, it was just, there's going to be a pole shift. And at that time, there's no internet, there's not, I don't even know if pole shift was maybe on the radar. I do think that people like Nostradamus or Edgar Cayce or something had discussed it. And I could have come across that material at that age. I was an avid reader. I read, I went to the library and checked out books. So I think this was out there at the time, but we both became convinced that we were going to die and the world is going to end in our lifetime and Jesus is coming back in our lifetime. Now, the reason that is somewhat relevant is because it turns out that experiencers and abductees are shown a lot of cataclysmic earth changes by these entities. It is a huge theme to be shown the end of the world. A lot of times people see a nuclear exchange or they see something equivalent of a pole shift where there's giant, one of the dreams that scared the crap out of me, you spoke about some fears that I've had. One of my dreams is this mile-high tidal wave coming from the coast. And in one of these, I'm in New York City in a very tall building, and this wave is coming and it's killing people. And it turns out, again, in hindsight, I'm now 55. When I started really looking into this stuff, it's only been coming up on, gosh, year and a half or so, not very long. I end up meeting other people who are having these dreams. And, oh yeah, the wave, you've seen the wave? I end up talking to my mom. My mom has seen the wave, this giant mile-high tidal wave that's supposed to hit the East Coast. I have since, coming to UFO Twitter community, have held spaces where dozens of experiencers are coming forward saying that they have seen these very same things. And the abduction research shows that the entities during abductions are actually showing people, and it's actually, now I don't have memory of this, it's actually a video screen. It's a virtual reality screen that is sometimes immersive, and they're showing abductees the end is coming. And they blame it on climate change, which is super weird because climate change can't really cause a tidal wave or a supernova from the sun or anything like that. So that was in my childhood as well. And then when I was 17 was my first time meeting this so-called Hat Man. And again, at the time, there's no internet. I don't know. Don't even have zero exposure to anything called Hat Man or shadow beings or anything like that. These things were unnamed at the time. I have an experience with Hat Man. And then once I had the experience with Hat Man, the shadow beings actually continue throughout the entirety of my adulthood up until this year. Now, what I don't know during this time is, so when these shadow beings were attacking me, I end up finding out that my sister and I lived together for some time as an adult. I end up finding out this is happening to my sister, one of my sisters, and I end up finding out it's also happening to my brother. And so all three of us out of four that I'm aware of are having experiences with these shadow beings. Now, what I don't know at the time, and I only know now, is these shadow beings are very closely linked to the so-called aliens and the alien abduction phenomenon. And so while I don't have conscious memories of seeing aliens throughout this time, these shadow beings are on me, like I can't get rid of them. And it's only in hindsight, and now I've actually had some very conscious experiences now in my 50s where I actually realize, oh my gosh, these shadow beings are actually transporting me to these abduction scenarios and these abduction experiences. Once I figured that out for myself, I actually started speaking on it in the community and I was laughed at. I then ended up finding out gentlemen like Ted Rice, who's an abductee from Masquerade of Angels, Carla Turner. I end up speaking to a Ted Rice, and Ted Rice says, "Oh yeah, I've seen them. They turn themselves essentially, they turn themselves into this astral being in order to transport themselves from the ships into the bedroom. And when we see them, they can appear as a shadow person or a shadow being or a hat man, and then it's technology that they're using." And then they're doing the abduction, and Ted Rice has seen them now back on the ship and hitting something, I believe, on a like a tack belt, turning right into the gray alien. And so I am not aware of this the entirety of my 20s, 30s, 40s into my 50s. I just know these shadow beings are everywhere. And then when I was, this is something that really bothers me. When I was in my late 20s, internet had come out by that time. I think I was maybe 28 or 30. I might have even been my early 30s. Internet had come out. And I remember reading an article in Glamour magazine, of all places, and I believe it was Glamour magazine, about sleep paralysis. There was this thing called sleep paralysis. I'd never heard of it. And sure enough, this article is explaining exactly what happens to me. And I get on the internet and I went, oh my gosh, this is called sleep paralysis, right? And I go on the internet and it turns out that this phenomenon has been happening all across every culture for thousands of years. It's documented everywhere. And there are these entities that get on top of you. And a lot of times it feels like you're going to die, et cetera, et cetera. And so, but don't worry, it's a hallucination. The science says it's a hallucination. There's nothing to see here. And so in my late 20s, I became convinced that this was just a hallucination. And I actually told both of my siblings, don't worry about this stuff. Because at the time, I thought it was demonic. I thought this is some kind of demonic entity trying to attack me. I mean, it feels very evil and it feels like it's trying to kill you. So yeah, it's demon. And I told my siblings, hey, don't worry. There's nothing to be afraid of. Just take a deep breath and kind of write it out, right? And I'm still pissed at myself at the time for believing the science. So I went a long time believing that. And so a lot of people will say, oh, it's just sleep paralysis. You're hallucinating, whatever. Okay, I bought that for a long time. I really did. Until I was in my 50s and I, through some interesting circumstances, ended up having a lot of very conscious experiences. A few of them, I'm as awake as I am right now, talking to you, wide awake. It's almost a hyper reality, if anything. It's certainly not asleep. It's not hypnagogic, it's not sleep paralysis. It's actually wide awake. And so, to kind of circle all the way back around, when I'm in my 50s, I end up having conscious experiences with shadow beings that I now know are transporting me during the so-called alien abduction. And now I start going, wait a minute, this has been happening to me my whole life. And, I start asking questions and kind of go from there. So that's the majority of my childhood, and actually leading all the way up until fairly recently. When I was in my 30s, I was very sick. And I would also wake up with my pants on backwards and markings on my body. Anything anomalous in my life, I really chalked it up to this is medical. They actually tested me for several interesting diseases and making sure that I wasn't a bleeder, bruising easily and different things. Now in hindsight, those things are probably all related, although at the time I had no idea. And I would chalk it up to this has to be something medical happening to me. And in fact, I do have some medical conditions, to be very fair. So a bunch of interesting stuff happened, but it wasn't until I was in my 50s, and I'm 55 today, that I started going, wait a minute, there is something happening and it is not okay. And I can't ignore it. Like I have to figure out what's going on. And that's why I'm sitting here right now. So here we are.
So that's all really interesting. I wanted to ask before I sort of do a deep dive on some of this stuff. You mentioned a near-death experience, which also matches a lot of satanic ritual abuse, MK Ultra survivors. And I wanted to see, is there a correlation with that also with abductees that you found?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's huge. I'd say the majority, and I don't have a percentage, but the majority of abductees have also had a near-death experience. Now, a lot of them won't start having contact until after the near-death experience. But so many have had a near-death. And some people have had multiple near-death experiences. It's fascinating. And how is it possible that that's also happening in your community as well? There's so much overlap. Man, I don't know. It's so interesting. I don't know where to go from there. It's just
It's a
too
puzzle.
much. It is. It is. It's for sure.
That's fascinating. Okay, I wanted to make sure I asked that and didn't forget. The next question that I have, so this is interesting to me hearing about how this happens because it's so foreign to anything that I can conceive of how these abductions happen. For example, like Aaron, he had beings walk right into his bedroom and basically escort him to his backyard into a craft. And I wanted to see what was it like for you? Were most of your experiences astral? Were in your body where you were at? Were you taken? Did things come get you? How did that work for you when you were actually being abducted?
Yeah, so much of mine is these shadow entities uh paralyzing me. And then so in this last year and a half, I'm coming up on 2 years now of starting to have these conscious experiences. And a lot of it is these shadow entities showing up, they paralyze me. I can now feel them coming. And now my body's almost like on high alert. I can feel the electricity in the air when they're going to show up. They use technology. A lot of people think of shadow beings as a supernatural, paranormal type thing. And I can't say all shadow beings are aliens using technology. There's other cases. People can be astral traveling. You can see entities that are just humans who have passed. There's different things that shadow beings can be, but one thing that they are is some of them at least are related to this abduction phenomenon. So they paralyze me. A lot of times I'll feel them just ripping me, my soul, my astral body out of my body. And then I will be in some type of a medical situation. So much of this is medical. I will end up on a flat, like a metal table. Or sometimes I end up in the dentist chair, and the dentist chair is definitely, definitely not a fan. And so a lot of this transportation for me is happening by these shadow beings. Now, there was one time, and I think it's going to be so much of the really crazy stuff that happened to me at about this time last year. So I'd say between January and March, April of last year, at one point, this shadow being had wrapped itself around me, and I think it was about to take me out of my body. And I had learned at this point to be able to break out of this being paralyzed. So the first thing the aliens do is they paralyze you. They don't want you, having access to your body, so they paralyze you. I learned actually to get out of being paralyzed. And in this specific time, I actually get out of being paralyzed and I open my eyes and sit up, and there is an alien in my bedroom, like physical 3D. I can see it. As soon as I see it and I'm kind of fumbling, I'm trying to get my phone to actually turn on a light, which is a whole different dumb story. So I can scare it away. And that was it. It was gone. So a lot of times that how it happens for me when I started becoming very conscious, I could feel their technology. I started realizing, wait a minute, this is technology. They're using technology to get me. It's not necessarily supernatural. It's not magic. It's technology. And, they just vibrate you right out of your bed. I mean, I have been vibrated up through the ceiling of my house that I'm living in right now. So sometimes they take the physical body, but sometimes they take the astral body or the soul or the consciousness. People will call this different things. And what's super weird about this is there have been times where I was close to certain that my physical body did not leave the location, but I have come back with bruises on my physical body the next day. And so it's super weird. There's some mystery here. Like, what technology do they have that can transfer your essence, your soul, your astral body, your consciousness out of the body, and then seemingly into some type of body? Some people will call it a cloned body. They do these medical things to the body and then to return with bruising. It's super weird. And it sounds super crazy, but they're doing this in the military industrial complex as well. So both the aliens and the so-called military industrial complex, I was going to say so-called military, but I try to get away from the MILABS thing because it's not military how we think about it. It's actually probably more private corporations and contractors that are working for, the special access programs that are doing this. So that's generally how it works for me. There have been times where I was had signs of being certain that my physical body was taken. And then there are other times when I'm fairly certain the physical body went nowhere. But it's only because I've had so many experiences back to back to back that I was able to become more aware of what was going on. I think a lot of people who believe they're being physically abducted might not be actually getting physically abducted. But at the same time, they are carrying out this hybrid breeding program that absolutely requires the physical body. They're physically taking physical eggs out of women, and they're taking physical biological material from men. So it is it can be a very physical thing. Like Aaron was walked onto a spaceship, but it can also be a non-physical thing. They are very much interested in the soul, in the astral body, in the metaphysical side. At some point we could start asking ourselves, why do they need human women at all? Why aren't they just incubating their hybrids only in these artificial wombs that abductees have seen? Why do they implant the hybrid back into the woman's body? What is that? There's a metaphysical reason for that. And I'm just kind of going off on a tangent there, but 9 times out of 10, I feel the technology, I feel the paralyzing, and then my next memory is generally in some type of a medical situation. A lot of times it's gynecological, medical type situation. So that's what they're focused on for the most part.
And you don't have to go into detail about this, but
Yeah.
do you have any idea what they were testing you for, or have you heard stories from other people of what exactly are they looking for in these, taking you and others to medical facilities, dentist chairs, putting you on these, sort of tables and experimenting? What exactly are they? Can you hypothesize or maybe know what are they doing? What do they want?
Well, most of what they're doing, I think they're doing a few different things, but most of what they're doing with abductions, with abductees, is all involving this hybrid breeding program. Most of what they do is they're taking women, they're doing exams. Females can get abducted maybe 4 times a month. And it's a lot of it's related to the menstrual cycle. They're taking eggs, they are adding alien genetic material, and then they're re-implanting back into the woman. So they're taking a male abductee, a female abductee, and alien genetics, and they're putting that back into the woman. The women are carrying for up to 3 months. Generally speaking, right when a woman's thinking, gosh, could I be pregnant? They're actually taking the hybrid out. And then the hybrid actually goes into a strange artificial womb environment to finish growing. That's most of what they do. Most of what they're doing, most of what I have experienced is these gynecological exams. And then, strangely enough, which I didn't quite understand, but I do now, taking care of their children, taking care of these hybrid children. And I know it sounds absolutely insane, but the abduction research actually shows many abductees saying this very same thing. So I would, before I became aware of the UFO Twitter community or any of the research or spoken to other people, I was thinking, why am I always playing with these kids? Why am I babysitting these children? And some of them look super hybrid looking, and some of them look like human children. And I couldn't figure it out. And I would know, like, these children have no parents. These children are orphans. So I would know this. And then I came across the abduction research. This is what they're doing. Are all UFOs doing this? Probably not. But the majority of the UFOs and the beings inside these UFOs are single-mindedly focused on creating a hybrid race. And almost all abductions have to do with contributing to this goal of them creating a hybrid race. Once I started really waking up, and I ended up really pushing back on during my abductions, I ended up in some very interesting testing type scenarios where it seemed like I was being tested. I took away from that they were trying to figure out, why am I waking up? Why am I pushing back? Why am I not going with the agenda? And so those are interesting too. And a lot of that is being able to see through their projections. And so a lot of times on the ships, these grays and the hybrids are actually projecting images that are not real. And so a gray will project an image of actually being a human being. And I think this is just done, to get cooperation. And if you are even in a dream and you see a gray alien, you might be thinking, oh, dang. And you might kind of push back on that, even if you think it's a dream. But if it presents as human or somebody you know, or your boss or your husband or your brother, that leads to more cooperation and it makes their job easier. And so a lot of what I end up going through up until, well, even recently, but these last couple years, has been being able to see through their projections. And so they would present themselves as one thing, and I would look and go, no, you are not, my husband. This is not my husband. This is not my grandmother. This is not my grandfather, whatever it is they're trying to project. And it's kind of like calling BS on what they're trying to project. And then they will actually just change into something else and see if I could see through that. So I've been through a lot of testing, and it seems like a an abilities testing to see through their projections, and then some psychological testing I've gone through. I've gone through testing on how to conceal my own thoughts from them. Some really interesting stuff, but I would say 80 to 90%, if not more, of all abductions where they actually take you from your bed and you end up in a spaceship somewhere has to do with the hybrid breeding program. And they're single-mindedly focused on this.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that's really terrifying actually to think about. Now, when you were and have, I know you still go through these experiences and they seem like now you're able to be more conscious and maybe more aware of what's going on and have maybe more control in the situation. What does time look like? Do you go and have this experience, you come back and it's the exact same time that it started? Is there missing time where you're like, oh my gosh, I was gone for 3 hours they were experimenting on me and I literally lost 3 hours of my life? What does that transition look like and how does time work in these situations?
So people will say different things about that. To me, I think time is different. I think they can have some control over time. Some abductees have been missing time, some abductees have gained time. And so it's like they're in some kind of time manipulated environment. Even if you're just on a ship, inside that ship is some type of metaphysical mystery. It might even be that it's actually in the astral or the spiritual realm, that they're phasing in and out of the physical and spiritual realms. So time to me is different. However, I am friends with another abductee, and she thinks time is hour for hour. And so, there is different ideas on that. I, in my life, have had a couple of interesting times where I should have arrived somewhere at a certain time and didn't, but no conscious memories of, being pulled over on the side of the road, being abducted, and all of a sudden, 10 hours are missing. You'll hear that a lot. A lot of people have that experience. That's not one of mine. So to me, 9 times out of 10, this is going to happen at night when you're in your bed, and I will get paralyzed. I will be gone. There are times when it seems like 3 days have passed, but it's just been the night. So there's definitely something interesting going on there. I think it's still a mystery, but again, you can have gain time, you can have missing time. So something is definitely interesting going on there.
Okay, so one of the things that I was really excited to talk to you about, because this also is probably controversial and a little bit different than what most people hear if they learn about these phenomena and experiences from, say, mainstream media. You actually have a belief and I suppose, idea of where these beings come from. And one of the things that you've said is that they're not from outer space, these aliens and these creatures, these beings, these shadow figures, these entities. I would love to dive into that a little bit and get your insight on that because, again, I think that corroborates a lot of stories of guests that I've had on this podcast, even with demons and things like that, different shadow beings that have been talked about on my show. I think this is an interesting topic to discuss within this community also, that, the experiencers and abductees and how it relates. So I'd love to hear your feedback on that.
Sure. So, I used to think that once I realized that there was aliens involved, which by the way, that took me a long time. It took me a long time to, as a sane, rational person, to wrap my mind that this was happening to me. I was very reluctant to believe it. I wanted it to be anything else. I'm fully aware of how outrageous and ridiculous it sounds. I understand that there are so many psychological explanations and, whatever. So when I first just even wrapped my own mind around what was happening, I believed that these were aliens from outer space. I thought they were, sometimes we use the term space brothers. I thought they were our space brothers, aliens from outer space, aliens from other planets, what have you. And I've told this story before, but it's important, I think, to understand that, yes, I am a Christian and I was a Christian at this time. And the first time I ever heard, it was Ray Boucher, who was trying to correlate aliens and demons. Now, Ray Boucher had an incident where he had two DoD employees come to him, and they were discussing the government doing rituals to call forth these entities. There was remote viewing involved. There was remote assassinations involved. And I had listened to this podcast and I just thought, well, this is silly. These aliens are not demons. I mean, they don't look like demons. They don't act like demons. You know, they don't even give off this evil presence, except for, at the time, I believe these were shadow, beings taking me. This is silly. And I actually turned it off. I didn't even listen to this whole podcast. I turned it off and actually thought, I just completely rejected the idea that aliens had anything whatsoever to do with demons. And so I think it's important to understand that was my mindset. A lot of people will say, well, you're a Christian. Of course you think it's related. Or they actually put words in my mouth. Of course you think aliens are demons. I actually don't think aliens are demons. I think they're actually two different things, but I do think that they're all playing on the same team. And so I think there are space brothers. It takes me an embarrassingly long time to realize that this is so much more than what it appeared on the surface. And once I'm figuring this out, and this is a long, complicated story that I don't think I've ever gotten all the way through, I start wondering, why are these aliens transferring my soul out of my body? Why does it seem like they're trying to reverse engineer the soul? Why does it seem like they're so interested in this? And that kind of set me on a path of, okay, this actually doesn't make sense. And I think what happened with me was they were just coming back to back to back because I'm starting to become conscious and aware. I'm pushing back when they're coming at me with their medical stuff. I'm actually at some points physically fighting and not being cooperative. And during this time, this is a telepathic environment. And so I can't help but pick up on whatever is going on. Now they try, to hide their thoughts, I'm sure, but they're not hiding them all, and they can't hide them all. And so I end up just being in this environment enough that I realize they're taking my soul. They're very interested in these parts of us as human beings. And that doesn't make any sense to me. Why would a space alien from another planet be removing my soul from my body? At the time, as far as I was concerned, this was the purview of the Almighty God and not aliens. So why would aliens be able to do this? Why would they have this power? Why would they have this interest? What is that? That doesn't say space aliens to me. And I think, picking up on a lot of stuff in the environment. By this time, I'm actually getting, the UFO community calls it downloads, being dropped right into my head. And I'm now understanding this is not what it appears to be. And it's many different things that kind of come together to bring me to this understanding. It's not one thing. And I start pushing back and realizing, wait a minute, these are not space aliens. They're interested in my soul. They're removing me from my body. They're putting me into other bodies. What is happening? And the more I pushed back on this, I end up actually getting kicked up the food chain. And I now understand, but at the time I didn't, I now understand this has happened to several abductees. As long as we go with the program that these are space aliens and our space brothers, and they're just here to upgrade our consciousness, they're going to save us from climate change or nuclear war. They're here to ascend us to the 5D, New Earth type, as long as we, kind of buy off on that and say those things. The onboard experience can be more pleasant. And I don't mean pleasant because it's not pleasant to be snatched out of your bed at night. I mean, you don't get extra attention. Now, that's not always the case, but it seems to be a theme now that I'm aware of the abduction research, and I now have abductees reaching out to me constantly. So I start pushing back. I get kicked up this food chain, and I am now seeing demons. And there's no other way to put it. Straight demons. These things have animal heads, and they are like a half animal, half human. They exude an entirely different energy. They are malevolent. They let their intention be known. So they're putting off the energy of just pure evil. And they are doing things that are not alien things. So I don't think aliens are demons. But when I started pushing back on the alien agenda, I got kicked up the food chain to start meeting demons, who, by the way, were also taking me to a spaceship. So it's not like the demons took me underground into hell. No, the demons actually took me to a spaceship on one of these occasions, and I could probably find some more. So I start pushing back on this agenda, realizing, wait a minute, there's so much more going on here than just these alien space brothers. I end up probably between January 2023, yeah, we're in 2024. January 2023 to April, May of 2024, I'm causing a ruckus. And I'm now actively trying to break out of the paralysis, actively searching for ways to stop what I now understand is actually technology that's taking us out of our beds. And so I'm full rebellion mode. Like, you are not doing this to me anymore. You're not space aliens. And this is going to stop. Like, I'm out. I end up having some incredibly terrifying experiences with these reptilian beings. And I probably won't go into either one of those incidents today, but one of them gave me the name, and this is a reptilian entity. So this is an entity appearing as a human, but the human part is just a projection. And what's underneath the human, for me, is a reptilian looking skin, but it's a reddish, pinkish looking skin. Now, up until this time, I had not yet come across any abduction research. I have no idea what this is, but I know it's not human. And I know it's got this, you could almost say it looked like burned skin, crinkly. I actually have a picture that sometimes I share that it looked like this skin. And actually, later on, I end up coming across, a couple months later, I end up coming across an advertisement for Stranger Things. And the Stranger Things monster has this reddish to pinkish, crinkly skin. And I saw it and went, oh my gosh, that's it. Like, that's the skin that is on these beings that I'm getting punished by. And this is the reptilian beings. These are not the animal head beings, to be clear. One of these reptilian beings actually gives me the name of Baphomet, because what has happened is there is a demon inhabiting this reptilian body. And I know it sounds crazy and it's a little bit more complicated, but I'm kind of trying to shorten the story to make it understandable. I deal with these reptilian beings. They're red-skinned, not green. And they look like the Stranger Things monster, to just make it short. Kind of a mix between Freddy Krueger and the Stranger Things monster. One of them gives me a name. You know, could it be lying? It certainly could be lying. But I've come across these reptilians that when they're reptilian, and I've come across these reptilians when they have been inhabited by a demonic entity. During one of these experiences, it gives me its name. It's Baphomet. For the longest time, I wouldn't even say that name out loud. Oh, where am I going with this? I was involved in rituals with these reptilians and these demonic entities, multiple rituals. And yeah, so I'm now remembering all this stuff, which is probably not good because I probably don't want to remember it. So where am I going with that? Okay, so I end up realizing these aliens are not demons, but the demons are right alongside with these aliens. The demons are playing ball with the reptilians. The demons are playing ball on a spaceship that they took me to. And they're all on the same team. And I'm just going to kind of shorten it there because it's a complicated story. So I end up coming across aliens, many different types, and demons, different types. The demons that were inhabiting these reptilian bodies were higher up the food chain than the animal bodies that I was seeing. This ends up, now this is going to lead down a whole other rabbit hole, because these reptilian beings are actually calling me by a number. And they're calling me 18, calling me 18. I didn't tell anybody that number for the longest time, but I've told people now. 18, get over here. 18, this is how it's going to go. 18, this is how it was always going to end, was actually one of my last experience with them. This was how it was always going to end. So this is going to get down a whole other rabbit hole of who and what are these reptilians working for, and why are they calling me by a number? Because aliens don't call me by a number. So how did I get kicked up the food chain to demonic entities who make it very well known that they're demonic entities, or they want me to believe with my whole heart that they're demonic entities? Why are these entities also calling me by a number? Where did I get a number? How long has this been going on? And how did this happen? And actually, that's part of the help that I'm actually searching for today from your audience. So when I came to UFO Twitter last year, I ended up meeting the community. And at this point, I know there's multiple things going on with me. I know I have met these aliens. I know I have met these demons. And I know there's now a human component. And there's actually a couple of stories that we could go into there as well. But I didn't mention it to anybody. What I was asking people, and I would ask every abductee I could speak to, have you ever been called by a number? So I'm looking for abductees who have been called by a number, and kind of trying to figure this out. Now, by some interesting circumstances, I end up coming across Penny Shepherd. Are you aware of who Penny Shepherd is? Okay.
Yep.
So when somebody in one of my spaces says, hey, Fringe, I am aware of someone else who is called by a number. And this took a few months to happen. I couldn't find anybody else who was called by a number. I couldn't find anybody in a MILABS program. Nobody anywhere was called by a number, just me. So somebody says, hey, there's this other gal, her name's Penny Shepherd. Here's her Twitter. Go check her out. I go to Penny Shepherd's page. And at this point, I haven't told anybody the number that I was being called. I haven't told anybody the circumstances, and I probably won't get into that today on what those incidents were. I come across Penny Shepherd's Twitter account, and I got to her website or something somehow. So the first thing I see is Penny Shepherd is called by a number. And I'm saying, okay, I'm onto something. Penny Shepherd is called by a number, the number 11. Penny Shepherd believes that there's a show called Stranger Things, that the Stranger Things show was actually modeled after her own life, that she was number 11. I'm reading her material, and by this time I had come across the coincidence that these creatures I'm dealing with look like the Stranger Things monster. And I then read in her bio that number 11 is actually the day she was born. And so she was born on the 11th day of the month, and they call her number 11. Well, I was born on the 18th day of the month, and they call me number 18. And now I'm in freak out mode, and I'm going, wait a minute, what is happening? And actually something else happened, I think before then, that I could go back to. My husband had mentioned to me at one time, you know, that's the day you were born, maybe. And I said, that's ridiculous. How big of a list could you have of people where you're calling them by the day they were born? There's only 30 numbers or 31 numbers that you could possibly use. Are they calling other people 18? Or is it just me? Because it felt very personal, by the way. So when I came across Penny Shepherd also being called by a number, and it was also the day of her birth, my heart stopped. Figure of speech, of course. I could not believe it. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is too much. And a couple other things happen. I'm reading her stuff and I'm going, wait a minute, this is the stuff that's happening to me. Some of this stuff, I know exactly what she's talking about, stuff that's very hard to, fabricate if you haven't been in the situation. And I can get back to those things too. So anyway, I end up at some point on a phone call with Penny Shepherd. And Penny Shepherd ends up asking me strange things like, do you have a gap in your teeth? And I go, and you can't see. You see that I don't have a gap in my teeth. But Penny Shepherd wouldn't know that when I was a child, I used to have a gap in my teeth. And at some point, I think I was 10 or 12 years old, my mom took me to the dentist who fixed the gap in my teeth, and I have never had one since. And so I haven't had a gap in my teeth for 50 years, 45 years. Hopefully I'm doing that math right. And now I'm thinking, what the hell? How does this woman know I have a gap in my teeth? So, these are things that are just kind of obscure. And she starts going down the list and she says, do you have any of these family names in your history? Sure enough, one of the family names that she came up with is my grandfather's last name. Not my biological father's side, my mother's side. On my mother's side is one of the family names that she asked me about. And now I'm just going, what? How does this woman know basically everything about me, everything that's happening to me during my own perceived MILABS experiences? And she tells me this is an MK Ultra program. She was actually, I believe, 10 years before me. And, the whole number thing, et cetera, et cetera. There's a Montauk component to it. And we end up talking for, I don't know, hour and a half or so. This woman knew more about me than I knew about me, put it that way. And so when I'm done with this phone call, and understand, Penny Shepherd is probably an amazing person. Every person I speak to, they could be an agent, as far as I'm concerned. They could be they could be working for the CIA. They could be completely lying. They could be sitting behind a keyboard somewhere, making up every single thing they're saying. And she could still have an altar for all I know. And this is nothing whatsoever against Penny. She was lovely to me. She could still be on the payroll and not even know it. However, she told me some things that I just could not believe, that you could only know if you had experienced it or someone experienced it, told her about. And so we went down the road of Mengele, von Braun. Apparently, if this gap in the teeth is somewhat hereditary and it only goes back to certain family lines, and et cetera, et cetera. I get off this phone call and I now have a much better understanding of what has been happening to me, because I had not mentioned this to anyone in the UFO Twitter community, but I was going through some very interesting experiences that were not with aliens. And they were different. They were completely different and not with aliens. And when I got hold of Penny Shepherd, I realized this woman knows exactly what I'm talking about, because she told me. I didn't have to tell her. So prior to that, there were some people who told me, hey, just so you know, you're some of the things you're talking about, that's space programming for MK Ultra. And I'd go, okay, maybe. I'm not sure. But because this is so complicated, my MILABs were not like anyone else's MILABs. So I have now, at this time last year, I'm now contacting abductees. I now have a Spaces host partner who is a MILAB, and people have different experiences than I'm having. It's totally different. My old Spaces partner, Bridget, she'd be wonderful to have on your podcast. She'd be fascinating. She's amazing. She remembers the programs that she was in. She remembers the men who were in uniform. One of these men is a very big name in the UFO Twitter community. People would hate to hear this name, and maybe she'll come on and tell that story. It's not mine to tell. She remembers exactly how she got into the programs, and so many people, they remember being in gate. They remember how they got into the programs. They remember, going to these like testing in school and then going to special classes, et cetera, et cetera. I have none of that. That's partly why I'm still trying to figure out, how did I get a number? How did I get into some MK Ultra program with a number, with entities that look like the Stranger Things monster? So my experiences were very different. And once I talked to Penny Shepherd, I realized, okay, this is a whole other thing. This is a whole other side of these MILABS experiences of what's happening. And I'll explain them briefly. How far have we gone? I've been rambling for how long?
No, you're good. Keep going.
Over 2 hours. There's so many rabbit holes to go down. I have never once gone down every single rabbit hole or explained the entirety of the situation. I haven't done it a single time yet because it's so much. So what's happening during my MILABS experiences, it's a little different. I find them transferring my consciousness. I'm going to go back, actually. So there was a period before I spoke to Penny Shepherd that I came across this woman. Her name, I believe, is Elisa or Elsa or Elisa, and she was on the Journey to Truth podcast. And by now, I'm trying to figure out what is happening to me. Something very strange is happening to me. And I haven't heard anybody else talking about it. And although now I'm sure there are others talking about it. I come across a podcast, Journeys to Truth. She starts talking. Before she even comes on the screen, or right when she comes on the screen, my entire body starts vibrating. And the vibrating to me is a sign that they're coming. Like they vibrate my body, and then, and I'm paralyzed, and here we go. My body starts vibrating. My vision actually goes completely white, like it whited out, like an old TV station channel, when there was no program on. Completely white, my vision. And I'm thinking, what is happening? I actually stopped the video and I had to recover myself. Like, what is happening right now? And some interesting things end up happening where the video wouldn't play, all these stuff. And I end up watching this video, and this woman explains exactly what's happening to me. And I'm now going, what the hell? Okay, this is happening to other people. It's not just me. This is not, some strange branch of abductions that's happening to only me. It's happening to other people. And she starts discussing about how our military industrial complex, and so much of this is private corporations, have the technology to take our astral bodies, our consciousness out of our bodies, and to put it into other bodies. And things happen during these times. You've heard someone, I don't know if you've heard of, there's a guy named Marshall somebody, and I can't remember his entire name, but he speaks about this a lot. He speaks about going into an arena and, gosh, it'll come to me.
Donald Marshall?
What's his name?
Is it Donald Marshall by chance?
That's him. She starts talking about him and how they transfer his body, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I don't know who this person is, but this is exactly what they do to me. Now, I don't end up in his circumstances. He has some really interesting circumstances he ends up in. I've not ended up in those circumstances. But she starts talking about how they can transfer your soul, your astral body out of your body and put it in another body. And this is what's been happening to me. And I know this is what's happening to me. I know that I am not in my body. I know I'm in someone else's body. And when this is happening, what ends up happening a lot of times is I'm on some kind of a mission, and there is something I must accomplish while I'm in this body. And a lot of it, I'll shorten it up, has to do with spying, smuggling, and eliminating targets, eliminating other targets. And when I'm talking to, so this has happened with Elisa. This had happened, I don't know, it could have been a month or 2 months before I could check my journal. And now I'm talking to Penny Shepherd. And Penny Shepherd is telling me they have this technology. This is what they do. And I explained to her, okay, now that she's told me all this, because I'm not going to give up my stuff first, of course, we end up talking. And I end up saying, can they do this? And she says, oh yeah. And I said, this is what I've been doing. This is what's happening. I'm in other people's bodies and this is what I'm doing. She says, oh yeah, this is what happens. Cause she's now talked to, multiple other people as well. And I have now talked to, I think I've come across maybe 3 other people this is happening to, where the consciousness is transferred into another body and there are missions involved. This could go down an entire super soldier, conspiracy rabbit hole. Most people in the UFO community will laugh about this and discount it and say that this is absolute nonsense. I'm telling you, either it's happening to me or somebody is spending a lot of money, resources, and effort to make me believe it's happening. So that's where I'm at with it. I have not come across anyone else other than Penny who is called by a number. And I would love any of your listeners, any of your past guests, anybody who might have any information on any program that this might be related to, that might ring any bells with anybody. In the last incident, and they said to me, this is how it was always going to end. And they called me 18 and they said, this is how it was always going to end. And during this last incident, I knew this had been happening my entire life. It was a very matter-of-fact situation. There were other people in the room who were also being called by a number. That's the only thing they referred to as a number. By the way, the aliens don't call me anything. They don't call me a name. They don't call me a number. They don't call me anything. Everything is just known. Everything is just known. So that's where I'm at with that. I would love to have any help your audience might have. Do people do this all the time? I am incredibly aware of how insane it sounds. But this is what's happening. And hey, it's happening. I'm talking about it and I'd love to have any help that I could have. I did get an interesting piece of information. It was audible. It was just something that was dropped right into my head. This happens to abductees all the time, by the way. It's not as strange as it sounds. We get information just dropped into our head. People call them downloads. It's just like a giant block of information just gets plopped in there. In that moment, I know all the secrets of the universe, and then the information actually, generally speaking, it dissipates. I was actually told that I was in Project, at the time, the first time it came through was Project Destiny. And then the second time, I thought it sounded like Project Eternal Destiny, but there is a project called Preserve Destiny. And I kind of wonder, could those words have sounded similar, just in the sound of it, and I might have not heard it correctly. Before Project Destiny, there was a project called Oak Tree, and that would have involved my mother. So remember, my mom was a single mom. She was a pregnant unwed mother. And apparently there was a program called Oak Tree, and it starts with the mom of the Project Destiny children. And so Project Preserve Destiny, there's a book called Above Black. And that project was genetic manipulation in the womb of children who would one day be able to communicate with the aliens. Someday when the grid goes down and there's no communication, they're going to use these kids. And they're not going to use them as kids. They actually wait for them to grow up. The gentleman who wrote this book, it's a great book. The gentleman who wrote this book actually speaks about how there's a certain percentage of children that they know, children who are born into military families, there's a certain percentage of those children who will return. And so they took a bunch of females and they did genetic manipulation in the womb. And those children, they know some of them will return to the military. Those children, once returned to the military, were put into special access programs. And this gentleman is taught how to communicate with the non-human intelligence. And this was for some time in the future when there would be no means of communication other than these people who were being trained in this program. And the book's called Above Black, I believe. And so I've now gotten that information plopped into my head. It was actually a voice. And, but I have no idea if that's true. If I was in that project, I have no idea if my mom was in Oak Tree. I just know that these are the things that have, been told to me, for lack of a better term. And I don't have any way of finding out. I have no way of investigating it. I have no idea how to find out. I would love to find out. I mean, it's not essential, but I would love to know, how did this start? I obviously got on the non-human radar from both sides of my family. How did I get on the human radar? How did I get involved in some program where they're taking me out of my body and sending me on these so-called missions, which I do want to actually point out that it could actually be some type of training program. Though a lot of times the aliens too are using a virtual reality. It's not real. And it can be hard to pick up on, but I'm decent at picking up on it. And I started toward the end of last year, I started thinking, I'm not sure that this is real. I think these might be a simulation environment, like a virtual environment, and some kind of training that's actually taking place potentially for the future. I'm not, I can't say that for sure, but that's kind of what I'm getting from it. So yeah, I'm super interested in that. If anybody has any ideas on those two projects and how I got onto that radar. My mom was born on Mare Island on a base. So, I mean, there's certainly opportunities, for this kind of thing. She was in the home for unwed mothers. I have no idea what stuff was going on at that place. It was just a full CPS foster care, involvement in that home for unwed mothers where she was at when she was pregnant and where I was born. So yeah, that was a couple rabbit holes that I probably didn't fully explore, but at least they're out there for now.
Thank you for that. While you were talking, there's a guest that I had on my show. I'm going to send you his episodes. His name is Nicholas, and
Okay.
his whole experience was as a child being taken from his body astrally, and he was used in MK Ultra projects and clone bodies. And I think you two might have some puzzle pieces that could connect with each other. So I'll send you some of his interviews. This stuff does sound crazy because it is. And because
It is crazy. It's science fiction. It's science fiction. We're talking about science fiction that's actually happening in people's real lives.
yes, we are exposed to it in movies, and movies are fiction. They present it to us as fiction. So that way, when we're presented with it as being real, we discard it, but reality is stranger than fiction. It really is. It surpasses any movie that we could ever watch, and where do you think people get ideas from movies? Like there's inspiration from reality, so it does sound crazy, but we know watching this show, like none of it is.
You have a lot of crazy on the show. I'm aware.
Everybody says that. Yes, everybody's like, I know this sounds crazy. I'm like,
I
it
know it sounds
doesn't.
crazy.
It
I know,
doesn't.
I know I'm not the only one saying, I know this sounds crazy, but trust me, I'm sane. I've never been to care of a psychiatrist. I do not do drugs. I very rarely drink. Could there be a psychological explanation? Okay. But someone or something out there is spending a whole lot of money, time, and effort making me believe this is happening if it's not. And it took me a long time to even face it for myself. And then it took me a long time to figure out what is happening right now. And, here I am. So,
Yes, and you are not crazy. And it only takes listening to somebody that has been on my show. You can listen to 30 seconds of them talking to see that these are very intelligent, very brilliant, often sought out children and teenagers and adults because they're gifted naturally with high IQs and psychic abilities and spiritual gifts. Like I think the presentation that we get a lot of times is sort of like what I was saying. My first experience is learning about UFOs on TV, where, these like hillbillies, like I said earlier, like in trailer parks that were like getting abducted and like they didn't have any teeth. And like, it just was like a really like, really, in my opinion, like disrespectful presentation of, what this actually is. It didn't showcase people that presented on TV as like being very intelligent, and I found in my experiences, it's very opposite of what we see, that like it's strategic how people are picked and the person doesn't and may not know why, like how you're trying to piece that together. But there are reasons and there's clues such as bloodlines or DNA or spiritual gifts, whatever it is. You mentioned GATE program. That's like a huge one. A lot of my guests have been recognized in school somehow for being intelligent or gifted, and were placed in special classrooms and experimented on. And, that's a whole rabbit hole in itself, but this isn't crazy. Whenever you actually listen to it, it makes perfect sense. It's actually very sane, but we just live in such a censored and disinformation world that it's very hard for society to accept that this could be part of our reality, because it's very different than, the reality that we're told versus what we see on the big screen, in fiction and in movies, and I love how you relate it to science fiction. And I've heard you say that in interviews where you're like, if you're open to science fiction, I'd love for you to sort of be open to that being real. Like with my story, like it is science fiction, but it's not, it's science reality.
It is. It's like living in a movie. Sometimes I look at my life and I feel like I've lived in a movie. I mean, when I go down a couple of rabbit holes in my life, it sounds crazy. I mean, how can all of this kind of stuff happen to one person? But then when you start listening, that it's happening to many people. It's not just me. I have now come across so many abductees and the abduction research, and it all actually matches up. Being an abductee is like putting a big puzzle together. It's not just, I had one night that I saw, Hat Man, or I had one time as a child that I was missing for an hour. It's a big puzzle piece that has to be put together. Not all of these incidents are anomalous in and of themselves. But when you have, 50 out of the 60 things that happen to abductees, now you're kind of looking at, okay. And this is happening to so many people, like you said. It sounds like science fiction. It's acceptable to watch on TV and in the movies, but it's not okay to actually be happening in real life. And that's part of kind of why I do these interviews and stuff and just talks and spaces and meeting other abductees, because it's important for everyone out there to understand this is happening in people's lives. It's happening to real people, real families, probably somebody this is happening to some, probably. If you take targeted individual, you take the MK Ultra, the SRA, and the abductees, I guarantee someone this is happening to if you put all those together. And it's just something that people don't want to talk about. And it's a sad state of affairs.
It is. And I've noticed too, just understanding all of this and having this being brought as a thing that challenges my own reality and what I always thought it was. I've recognized that they really take the spirituality aspect out of our reality. Everything is so tangible and it's physical, and, evidence has to be presented, very nice and pretty, pieces of paper. And, they've totally taken out the corroboration of experiences that can't be held in, wrapped up in a perfect box with a bow on it, and that's why these testimonies are important, because you layer them on top of each other and they're all very unique and they have differences. But at the same time, there's these things, like you said, between all of these movements that correlate and corroborate, and they're exactly the same. And so you can't mistake that as being evidence. It 100% is, and so it's really important that people come forward and speak if they're able to, because it not only is healing to do if you're able to do it, but you're providing that your own evidence that can help corroborate somebody else who's sitting there saying, I'm crazy. Like, there's no way that all this stuff is real. I'm the only one who's gone through this, and more often than not, we see how many people actually have gone through all of these different phenomena and experimentation and, slavery, basically. And it's not uncommon. It's actually very frightening how common it is, and tying all of this together is really important. And I need to have you back on because there's like so much that I want to cover with you. And I want to talk about your story going public. But before I do that, I wanted to ask about We talked about aliens. I wanted to talk about craft and spaceships. What is your perspective on the technology side of it? Where does that come from, do you think? Is it related to government? Is it foreign from outer space? What's your opinion on what these different technologies and crafts are?
Yeah, and actually, I'm not sure I even fully answered your other question about where are these from? Where are these things from? I think they are. So I make a lot of general statements, but that doesn't mean every single case is. So could we have space brothers out there? Yes, we could. There might be a time traveling human component to this that's getting dropped into a lot of people's heads, including my own. Could that be a component? Yes. This could be more than one thing. So just to be clear. But in general, when we talk about the aliens, like the mantids, the reptilians, the tall grays, the small grays, the Nordics, there's these categories that we kind of fit them into, and there's 5 or 6 categories that many of these beings fall into. I don't think they're from outer space. I think these craft are being created here on the earth. I think that these things are living underground. This seems to be some type of metaphysical technology. Whatever these ships are, they're able to travel the astral realm and immediately into the physical realm and immediately out. I think a lot of what we see in the skies is probably ours. Human tech, reverse engineered tech. Did it originally come from the so-called aliens? Probably. But I think a lot of it is ours. It's a mystery. It's a mystery. These aliens, these so-called aliens, have a command of physics that we don't understand. And you just mentioned it a few minutes ago. I think the science has put us into this tiny little box, and only these things can be real. Only these things are allowed, and you have to be able to prove it 40 times, and you have to be able to reverse, prove it, et cetera, et cetera. And they ignore these things, like these craft, and that are obviously defying our laws, so-called laws of physics. The abduction phenomenon completely defies our laws of physics, and yet thousands of people are saying it's happening, probably more than that by now. So what is it? I'm not sure anybody really knows yet, and we're not going to be able to find out as long as we're just keeping ourselves in that little box of science. I've said before, I think that when the religious community comes together with the science, we start comparing notes, that's going to be where we solve this. When the science is willing to look outside of their little box that they've put us all in, because nothing can be true unless it fits into their box. Only then will we begin to understand it. Now, I do believe that there's special access programs, wrapping their minds around the physics. They're just not sharing it with us. They're not bringing it out into the mainstream. And so again, there's a lot of debunkers in the science out there where's your evidence, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, it's there. They are well aware that it's there, and they might not have figured the whole thing out yet, but they certainly know it's something that we can't understand just using our current understanding of physics. I think a lot of the supernatural, the magic, even in the ancient scriptures and in religion, a lot of that stuff, it's just going to be technology that we don't understand. They are masters of the laws of physics. And there's going to be a lot of laws of physics that we just have not even come across yet, and we have no understanding of it at all.
Thank you for answering that. That's insightful too, just because for people who might be newer to UAP, UFO, non-human intelligence type topics, I think again, if you're depending on the mainstream media to get that information, or if that's like what you grew up watching movies and, watching the Discovery Channel and all these like little documentaries, it's always from outer space. Like there's rarely ever a correlation with technology, I should say advanced technology existing that is, many years, if not decades ahead of what we're presented publicly, and so that too can be really hard for people to sort of wrap their mind around, that, our iPhones aren't the most advanced thing, and what's coming out next year, the new iPhone isn't the biggest and best thing. It's like 50 years behind what's actually in existence, if not more, seeing how fast technology is developed now, in comparison to even 10 years ago. It's so rapid. And so you think about like, what aren't they showing us? And why couldn't it be something that's so intelligent that it defies any logic, like you said, or laws of physics that like we are at now at this present day, where they're living 50, 100 years, maybe even more in the future with their technology that's not presented to us. So I think that's also a big piece of the puzzle on how the government ties into this, because are there intelligent beings, that are called aliens and we're told they're from outer space? Are they actually working with our government and helping them, craft technology, and then they're, taking humans and experimenting on them for these different projects? There's definitely a lot of questions to be asked, but I think, signs more point to that. The more testimony that we hear and the more that these stories are brought up, there does seem to be a big correlation with things happening on our planet. And it's not just, and like you said, maybe there are UFOs that travel here. Maybe there's craft that is on other planets and other galaxies. But I think we should also consider that there's stuff here that's living amongst us and that's being developed amongst us that didn't come from, somewhere else, that it's just here. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And one of the cool things about your journey, obviously you're doing podcasts, you made a decision to go public, and that's a really big step. You were a police officer, you have a family, you didn't have really anything to gain from this aside from obviously sharing your puzzle piece and learning, but I'd love to talk about what was that moment for you when you decided to go public, and why did you decide to, and sort of what was that journey for you?
So my decision to do this was actually straight defiance. At this time last year, and now I'm not going to be able to say that anymore because we're already in July. March, April of last year, I had some very, very traumatic experiences with these reptilian beings. And it became very obvious. I was getting punished. I mean, there's no other way to say it. I was getting punished for going against the narrative. And I think the very first thing I did was I started a website, and it was just straight defiance. I just said, you're not going to control me. I'm not doing this. I'm not playing your games anymore. You might be able to snatch me out of my bed at night, but I'm going to do something. And I started a website. And it was after an incident that just resulted in straight defiance. And then after a few incidents that happened to me that were extremely traumatic, it took me a very long time to get over it. You've probably maybe seen where I've said I slept in a helmet for 7 months last year. I spent the majority of last year trying to stop all contact with these beings. Including sleeping in a helmet of a material that is supposed to, help stop their technology, EMF, etc. After they did what they did, which again was extremely traumatic, and I won't get into it now, I was terrified, absolutely terrified, like I've never been in my life. And I decided, you're not going to do this to me. That's just not going to happen. And so I knew that they were very upset that I was pushing back on this narrative of the Space Brothers narrative. I knew that they were not happy about me putting the whole big picture together with the demons actually being involved in this and actually being on the same team and actually running the show. The demons that I've met or encountered are actually higher up the food chain than these aliens, although I'm sure there's, low-level ones as well. So I decided I'm retired. I can do it. A lot of people can't do it. A lot of people have way too much to lose. I'm very fortunate that my husband actually had his own experiences. He had an experience as a child. We have had some shared experiences. He has seen these entities, these reptilian and demonic entities. So I didn't have anything to lose there because he understood what was going on. And again, I don't have a custody fight. I'm not going to lose a job. When I look at even what I've risked, putting my face out there even, and not even my name, it's not a whole lot. Most people have a lot to lose. They do not want their families to think they're crazy. They don't want to lose, custody of a child. They don't want to get a divorce. So many abductees I speak with, their own spouses have no idea what's going on. It's actually it's really sad. And so it was 100% straight defiance. When I first came to UFO Twitter community, I actually had a picture on my Twitter that was not my face at all. And I did that for quite some time, but I spoke just voice, with no face and spaces right away. And it was just straight defiance and rebellion. And then the first time I did a podcast was the confessionals. It was Tony Merkel. Tony Merkel's a Christian. And it was a complete fluke. I had decided I'm not going to ever do a podcast, ever. It's never happening. This is not my comfort zone. I don't getting up in front of a camera and just rambling on, with a story that sounds half incoherent because I'm not even putting my own puzzle pieces together or my own story together in a coherent fashion, was not on my list. And I reached out to him one day. I said, hey, would you do a Twitter space? Because that's basically what I was doing. And he wrote back to me and he goes, sure, would you be on my podcast? And I just went, no way. I can't do this. I'm not going to do this. It's not going to happen. But
I just want to say too that was an amazing podcast. I loved that episode. Yes, you did awesome.
Thank you. I just decided this is okay. This isn't about aliens. It's literally spiritual warfare. This is evil and good. This is to do with the ultimate destiny of the human soul. And I have to do it. Like, he's a Christian, which was a huge part of why I went on his program and even up until the night before his program, me and my husband were discussing whether I was going to show my face or whether I was going to, put up whatever, an icon or something, because I know some people do that. And I understand some people have to do that. And believe it or not, this is so funny because I just remembered this as we're talking right now. I saw Aaron on a different podcast, and he was out there telling his story. And I just thought, you know what? If he can do it, I can do it. It's happening. Like, I'm not going to hide my face. I'm going to put my face out there. And I ended up, at some point I had my face on Twitter already, just a still photograph. And I said, you know what? I don't have a lot to lose. So many abductees have so much to lose. They can't do it, but I can. And so here I am. So it started as defiance, and it continues as defiance. I continue to try to push back. Any time, any chance I get, I'm pushing back, because I think what's going to ultimately happen is there's a potential for these so-called aliens to show up as our saviors. And I think they're going to say they created us. And I think they're going to say they're here to save us from ourselves, from us causing climate change or us in a nuclear war or something like that. And I think that a lot of people are going to be fooled. A lot of people are going to buy this narrative. And I think another thing that's as crazy as it sounds, this isn't about space aliens. This is about our souls. This is what they want. This is what they're after. And I think it's incredibly important for people to understand, at least keep an open mind, that if these things show up, question what you're seeing, question the narrative, question what our own government is saying about them, question what they're saying about themselves, and don't fall for it, because they are masters at deception and manipulation. And so I think ultimately it's probably the most important thing of our lifetime, and defiance, and because I can, because so many other people can't.
I love that so much. I've said a bunch of times on my show that I haven't met a single podcast guest that I've had that wanted and desired to be a whistleblower. It was always something bigger than them, where they were like, I have to speak out because there's people still going through this. I have to speak out because there's somebody out there that's just totally lost and feels alone, and I can speak on behalf of them and talk to them and make them not feel alone. There's people who have sadly not made it out of these programs and were used as sacrifices, you know, who will never be able to do a podcast, that don't have a voice, you know. And so I just think it's so heroic that you and others are fronting, you know, and taking that step and saying, you know, I don't want to do this. This is the last thing I want to do. Like, I just want to go live my life and like not have to deal with this. And I especially don't want to keep reliving it and talking about it. But I know that it's going to be helpful, and I know that it's going to be healing for me. It's going to be healing for people who listen, and that I have a puzzle piece that can help people, you know. And then the defiance part is always awesome, you know, watching people step into their power, going from victim to warrior. You know, it's like I had a guest on my show one time, and she was like, you know, and she's talking about her abuser. She's like, it's like they forged a really sharp weapon, talking about herself, and now it's pointed at them. And I was like, that's it. You know, like that's exactly it. Like these things, these abusers, like they totally, in so many cases, they underestimate that they're taking like the most resilient and powerful and brilliant minds and people, and they're trying to corrupt them. And the ones that they can't corrupt and that are incorruptible and that just their spirit will never break, they become like the most powerful and incredible warriors ever, and like the biggest threat to their secrets that they've been hiding since, you know, people can say since biblical times, you know, like they don't want this information getting out. And it's so awesome that you have stepped up in that role to share, despite, you know, I'm sure just wanting to like live a quiet life and not wanting to go public, much less show your face, you know. Like thank you for all the work that you've done, Fringe. Like you've really made such a dent, and it's so cool to see you being invited on these big podcasts and taking initiative and doing Twitter spaces and connecting people and sharing and corroborating evidence and researching. Like your journey is really important. And I just think it's so awesome that you're doing this. So thank you, you know, on behalf of me and this
Oh,
community, your community, you know, thank you for having an open mind and, you know, looking at things outside of the scope of maybe what's been conventional with UFOs, UAP stuff, with MK Ultra, and like, you know, helping us bridge this gap together.
well, thank you. I appreciate that. And have said before, at least to myself, I'm not sure if I've said it on a podcast, but you know, the things they do to us as abductees and the things I'm sure they're doing to the people in your own community, which we're hoping to bridge right now, starting with Aaron, is they have created incredible resilience, right? So it's almost a double-edged sword for them. They try to bring out, you know, these rituals, these tortures, these punishments, but it creates resilience, and it can create a warrior mindset. Now people can go in the other direction. I understand. You know, they tried to break me. Oh, they tried to break me at the May of last year, and they were fairly successful. They did a great job. But ultimately they created resilience. And, you know, here I am. You know, they obviously didn't destroy me. They didn't break me, but so it's always a double-edged sword for them. Everything they do is, and whether it's a non-human abuser or a human abuser, it's all the same thing. I sometimes think our human abusers actually learned from the non-human abusers. There's so much overlap and so many things that are exactly the same. It's almost the same situation. So, you know, they do this to themselves. If they hadn't done what they did to me as a punishment, I wouldn't be here today. I would still be thinking, wow, there's something interesting going on. Why are they transferring my soul? If they hadn't kicked me up this food chain and started, you know, coming down on me pretty hard, who knows how long I would have bought that for. So their punishments and their, you know, psychological games that they play, it can create warriors, it can create resilience. And that's probably where most of your, you know, your guests come from, that whole mind, the same exact mindset.
Yes, and I gained so much courage. And I know I get comments from that all the time that like, you know, listening to these testimonies makes me feel more brave and like makes me want to share my story or makes me want to stand up and do something, you know, and it's really awesome. Like, because again, none of you came out here to be heroes and to be, you know, quote unquote whistleblowers. Like, you're just doing the right thing, you know, and telling the truth, shining a light on the darkness, you know, and it's having a ripple effect where it's not only waking up people, but it's encouraging truth. It's bringing us back to that. It's re-educating us about the world that we live in, you know. So it's awesome, and I can't wait to watch you keep growing. I hope that you keep doing more podcasts, and you know, you're an eloquent, incredible speaker. And I know that you still are really active on Twitter. I'd love for you to talk about your social media presence, where people can connect with you, any projects that you're working on, or anything coming up in the future. That way people can obviously connect with you. I want people to, step up and not only support you, but if they have puzzle pieces for you to be able to connect and just to be able to support.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I'm in one place, and that's on Twitter. It's right there under my picture, Fringe at fringe.com on X or Twitter. I do spaces on Twitter. So it's just a place where Twitter actually has this amazing community. You guys have a community, the targeted individuals have a community, and the UFO people have a community, and it can be it's an amazing place to go. You can connect with other experiencers, other abductees, other MILABS people. There's pretty much a space going 24/7, including my own. Maybe once or twice a week, I'm doing my own spaces. And it's just an incredible place to connect with other people. I get messages from people and they say, wow, if it weren't for this community, if it weren't for your spaces, if it weren't for, me seeing you on XYZ, I thought I was all alone, and now I know I'm not. So it's just an amazing place to get together. And there's a lot of smart people on UFO Twitter trying to solve these problems every single day. So I highly recommend it. If you don't have an X account, if you don't have a Twitter account, make one, especially if you are an abductee, an experiencer, or SRA, human trafficking, targeted individual. There's a place for you there. There's other people you can connect with and talk to, and it can be life-saving. So I highly recommend creating a Twitter account and jumping on and checking it out.
I completely agree. Twitter, I didn't use, like, I've had a Twitter account for years and I never used it because I was like, this doesn't even make any sense. 140 characters, like, how does this accomplish anything? And I have just been amazed at how much easier on Twitter it is to connect with like-minded people and to find these communities than any other social media platform, hands down. And it's connecting us all really fast. If people wanted to get on UFO Twitter, how do they navigate that? Where do they find UFO Twitter on here?
So if you find me, which is right there on UFO Twitter on that handle, there's a hashtag, just hashtag UFO Twitter. There's a hashtag. Sometimes people refer to it as UFOX, or they might refer to it as UAPX or UAP Twitter. And that's the easiest way to connect, is just following that hashtag. And there's actually a community dedicated to UFO Twitter. You can join that community as well. If you just look at anyone responding to pretty much most of my stuff, most of those people are in the community, and then you just click on their profile and follow them and see what they're saying. If you join spaces, you're going to find a lot of people speaking in spaces, and you can follow people that way as well. I was like you, I had an old Twitter account that I never used. And I resurrected it, last year, and found this community, and it can be a lifesaver. Just realizing that there's other people out there that these things are happening to, and you're not alone. And then even if this is not happening to you, and you have enough of an open mind to explore the topic, it's a fantastic place for that as well.
100%. And I know that you don't yet, and I hope you do eventually start doing more video because you're so good at talking and like you're so good at breaking all this down. But you do other podcasts, and so you do have a YouTube channel. And I'd love for you to just share a little bit about that, because this is where people can see the work that you're doing on other people's podcasts.
Yeah, so there's a link there right on my profile, and it just goes to a YouTube channel. Now, I don't have any of my own videos uploaded. I don't actually produce a podcast, but I do have a playlist on that YouTube link that will link to all the other podcasts I've done. And then right next to it, there's another playlist there, and those are actually just audios of spaces I've done. Just a handful of the spaces I've done. Most of them are not there, but some important ones are there.
And is your website, do you still use that?
I do, but I had to close the contact box on my website after I appeared on the Confessionals podcast. So the best place to reach me is on Twitter. If you need to talk, if you need to talk about your experience, DM me on Twitter. I answer everyone who DMs me on Twitter. But yeah, that's the website. Check it out. I do have a blog on there. I have several entries there, and I actually just updated an entry not too long ago. And yeah, there it is. But the best place to reach me is on X or Twitter.
Awesome. This was such an honor having you on. You're gonna have to come back because I know like there's so much more that we didn't cover. We didn't get to your healing journey. I think that there's a lot that, a lot more that we can pack into different episodes. And we had talked about bringing Aaron and you on, which would be really fun too.
Aaron is why I'm showing my face right now. I think I mentioned this already. I looked at Aaron and I thought, if Aaron can do it, I can do it. And that's what made me decide to show my face on the confessionals. And once I did that, it was, that's it. You've crossed the Rubicon. I love Aaron, and that would be fantastic. And I think, is it Katie? Her name is Stellar Fox.
Yes, Katie.
So just that, even having the two of them together would bring a lot, right? Because they're coming from two different communities, so to speak, but with so much overlap. The two of them must have amazing conversations.
Oh my gosh, I'd love to be a fly on the wall for some of the conversations that they must have, like sharing experiences, that they've gone through. I completely agree. And you all give me courage. This is like, I've found my own courage through, meeting you and others. It's just really cool seeing people turning their pain into purpose and taking the things that were meant to destroy you and creating beauty in the world because of it, awakening people to truth and, ultimately shining a light on the darkness. Like there's so much more darkness in the world than we're told, and it can be depressing to wake up to, but it gives me a lot of hope seeing all the people with candles out there like you lighting the candle for somebody else and holding it up so people can be like, oh, there's the light. That's where I'm going to go, and the more of us that hold up our candle, the less dark there is, the more truth we speak, the less lies there are. The less hidden things that can exist if we're out here, sharing the truth and, ultimately the truth sets us free. So thank you, Fringe, for coming on today and for being a guest of honor. It's really awesome finally getting to connect with you and to share your story with my audience.
And thank you so much. Thank you for being a safe place where people can come and tell their story, because without people like you, people like me would have nowhere to go to speak this truth. So thank you so much. And I appreciate being on.
Absolutely. And for everybody listening, if you're on Spotify or Apple, iTunes, and you didn't get to see the Twitter pages or you didn't get to write down the links that we were just going over to connect with Fringe, I will have her information in the show notes and it lights up as a hyperlink. So just go in the show notes, click it, and it'll take you right to her sites. Like she says, you can contact her on Twitter through DM, and I can attest she's awesome at getting back to every single person in a very timely manner who reaches out, and she's very accessible. Go join UFO Twitter and click on some of the other hashtags that she puts on her posts to connect with community, connect with people in her comments that are commenting. Twitter has definitely proven to be a really awesome place to find like-minded people who have experiences or common interests that you may, so I am also on the same page as Fringe. Go get a Twitter account if you don't have one and come join us. But I'll have all of her links in the show notes. I'll have all my links to you. Connect with us wherever you can, you guys. We never know where we'll be censored or taken down. I ask you guys to please pray over Fringe as she continues her journey, pray over her husband and her family and her new puppy as she continues her quest and journey to shine a light on the darkness. And I will be praying for all of you on the other side. Thank you guys so much for listening. God bless you, and we will see you next time.